Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think folks are still logging on, but we will go ahead and get the conversation going. I am Marissa Cascino, Senior Editor at Washingtonian Magazine. We are here to talk about the kid-friendly smart home. How can technology be safe and beneficial to kids, which I think is a topic on a lot of families' minds right now, especially with school starting up again. So this should be an exciting conversation. Before I introduce you to our awesome panelists, I will quickly explain the Q&A function. You will see a chat box at the bottom of your screen. And if you have a question for any of our panelists, you can just pop it right in there and we will get to as many of those as we can toward the end of the discussion. Okay, let's meet our experts. So we have Monica Anderson, Associate Director at the Pew Research Center. She has done a ton of research on this very topic. We have Arturo Pichichi, Marketing Executive Director at Verizon Wireless, and Leslie Rohrbal, Director of Market Research at the Consumer Technology Association. Thank you all so much for being here. And I also want to quickly thank Verizon for sponsoring today's event. All right, let's get started. This is a question for the whole panel. I think, just to get a lay of the land, let's start with the prevalence of technology in children's lives today. What does this look like? How common is it for elementary schoolers to be walking around with smartphones and tablets and, plugged in all the time like their parents? And what are the implications of this? So I'll throw it to Monica first, if you don't mind kicking us off.
Sure. Thank you so much for that great introduction. Really excited for the conversation today. So at Pew, we've surveyed parents for many years about parenting children in the digital age, knowing that parenting has not ever really been easy, but now you have the added challenges of social media and smartphones. And so last year we asked parents of young children, so those under the age of 12, a whole host of questions, particularly pertaining to their child's tech use. And what we found is that even in some of the youngest children, so those ages 2 and under, they're interacting with digital tech in some kind of way. So in our March 2020 survey, about a half of parents with a child ages 2 and under said that their child ever uses or engages with a smartphone. About a third of parents said the same thing for tablets. And then about 15% said that their child ages 2 and under engaged with a voice assistant. So this is some of our latest data that looks at some of even the youngest children. Those figures do go up with age. So majorities of children ages 5 and up engage with a smartphone in some way. A majority of them are also engaging with tablets. And we also know that about half of children under the age of 12 have their own smartphone.
Yeah, and to add to Monica's point and her data, I think it's really also good to understand that technology is in every aspect of our lives, and it's not just smartphones or tablets. Really, the scope is really wide. We're seeing a lot of health and wellness products on the market, such as fitness wearables, medication trackers, and even air purifiers and sleep monitors. Education tools, obviously remote schooling has been top of mind over the past year or so, but also there's education apps. So for example, many museums around the world during the pandemic launched augmented reality or AR apps. So people could essentially visit the museum virtually, either by mobile device or even through virtual reality headsets. And of course, it really helps everyone staying connected. So again, I think it's good to understand that the scope of technology that children are interacting with is just evolving year after year based on consumer needs.
Yeah, and as a father of an 8-year-old girl and a boy of 12 years old, I can tell you that, Monica, the trends or the data points that you mentioned, they are accelerating, and we're seeing that in Verizon too. We're seeing that more kids are adding, smartphone lines, sooner than before. And part could be, Marissa, the trend that we're seeing on, okay, we are going back to school. We're trying to get out of the home. And what is happening in that transition is you want to be connected with your kids more. You don't know quite what can happen. You may need to connect with them. They need to get out of the school. Like that environment, I think, is driving also parents to try to or let the kids to be connected sooner out of the home. Inside the home, with so many devices, Leslie, to your point, the kids are being connected through smart TVs, through obviously tablets, right? And now through their own smartphone too, via Wi-Fi. So these trends are accelerated like the pandemic did with everything in our lives, right? Accelerating something that will happen anyway in the future is now happening now. Yeah.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, Arturo. The pandemic obviously has affected all of our reliance on technology to stay connected socially. I mean, to do things like what we're doing today that we might normally do in person. And how have you seen that manifest for kids specifically? I mean, are there new trends on this front that you're seeing develop? With regard to families being connected through smart technology as a result of COVID. I mean, kids relying on it on technology for school and socialization and all of these different things that have kind of evolved over the last year and a half.
Totally. I mean, like just with devices that we have, when you look at smartwatches for kids ramping up, that tells you, okay, my kid may not be ready for a smartphone, but I do want to be connected. So gizmos, those type of smartwatches for kids is ramping up. Then you have all this, proliferation of applications that help you to control the content that they access in the home and outside of the home. Again, as a parent, I can tell you, I know my kids are using several, devices, and I was telling you guys the other day, suddenly I saw my kid watching in the smart TV, YouTube, some content that was probably, a little bit more violent than I wish for my kids. So I didn't have my parental controls there, but you can tell that, the proliferation of these devices, and again, we're seeing it, is driving the parents to be really concerned of what, the kids are accessing. And given that, this concept of smart family apps where you can filter content, where you can set, screen times, it is really growing fast. And again, it's a combination of more devices and also the kids getting access to the web sooner.
Yeah, and before we jump to that very topic, the security and the sort of safety questions, I'd love to hear from Leslie and Monica on whether or not the data that they have data yet. I mean, maybe it's too early, but from the pandemic specifically, kind of showing, what the pandemic has done in terms of influencing kids and technology.
Yeah, so, one of the things that I definitely can speak to is picking up on your point about children and education. And as schools were shut down and now there is virtual learning, one of the things to be cognizant of is that even though we see the proliferation of these devices, it might seem smartphones and the internet is ubiquitous and computer ownership is ubiquitous, we know that's not true for all families. And one of the things that we've studied for quite a while at Pew is the digital divide, and including how that might impact young children. And so the pandemic was not the start of these digital obstacles, but they do bring to the forefront, if your child has to do their work on a computer, what does that mean if you don't have a reliable computer at home? So at the beginning, at kind of the beginning of the stay-at-home orders, we surveyed parents of school-age children about some of the challenges that they were concerned that their kid could face if they had to do all of their schoolwork at home. And there were some really particular differences by income, and particularly with lower income parents being concerned about the likelihood of their children not being able to complete their homework. So about 40% of lower income parents said that they were concerned that their child would have to do their homework on a cell phone. A similar share said the same thing, with having to find public Wi-Fi because they didn't have a reliable internet connection at home. And you also saw about A third of parents cited not having a reliable computer and being concerned that their child would not be able to complete their homework. So in that sense, COVID has really kind of honed into some of those real world examples of what digital access or lack of digital access means, particularly for young people.
Yeah, and to add on to that, and to what I mentioned at the top of the call, is that these devices are wide ranging, and of course with the pandemic, our entire routines have been interrupted. So with children, it's more than the educational aspect. It's the physical activity, getting out of the house, being able to monitor that, getting and staying active. Smartwatches and fitness activity trackers for monitoring children both in and outside of the home have certainly increased over the past year. CTA releases an annual ownership and market potential study every spring. And this year we found that 61% of households with children own smartwatches and 48% own wearable activity trackers. And, the newest smartwatches can monitor blood pressure, blood oxygen levels, heart rate, sleep habits, detecting some of those potential irregularities, notifying parents. You're able to share this information with your doctors. You're able to monitor that your kids are staying active and just aren't in front of a screen all day. But there's other products too, such as sleep and wake lights. So our sleep routines have been interrupted over the past year, just with as long as, everything else has. Many of these products, are backed by the Sleep Foundation. I even have one too. And some of these devices, simulate sunrises and sometimes sunsets. So children and adults have better night's sleep, which is, ever so important in brain development, especially at a younger age. But more broadly, individual smart home products now take on a variety of tasks and are really designed as multi-purpose tools. In addition to the data point I just mentioned in our ownership and market potential study, for the fourth straight year, smart speakers have had the highest household penetration at 41%, and purchase intent in the next 12 months is around 23% compared with other smart home products that we surveyed. And within that, 63%, almost 2/3 of households with children have at least one type of smart speaker. And smart speakers generally have a kids mode to filter content. It helps make the parent's job a little bit easier to monitor what they're engaging with, but it can also tell them fun jokes, play games, help with homework, and even teach good manners, like encouraging kids to say things like please and thank you.
Yeah, so safety has come up in a couple of your answers so far. So let's jump to that. I mean, I think that's an obvious question for families who are fortunate enough to be connected to all of these devices. Am I doing the right thing for my kids? Is this safe? Is it secure? I mean, are there questions that parents should be asking when they're setting up smart devices? Are there particular kind of steps they can take to make sure that that their kids are as secure as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. You want me to start there? Like, there are two areas, right? In home and outside of the home, right? But starting with in the home, you have, tablets, again, smart TVs. And back to my comment prior, you need to know what devices your kids are using, right? And then most internet providers, like Fios in the case of Verizon, include no cost parental controls. You go to, in the case of Fios, you go to the Fios app, and you can set up there what devices you want to control the content. You're talking about all the spectrum of content that you can filter right there. And then not only that, but the time that your kids are using, the different devices. So that's very helpful. And I think we all as a parent should look into it to make sure that, your kids are not finding or accessing content that you don't want. That's in the home side. And then you go in the outside of the home, then you have, in the case of Verizon, we do have even a plan for kids. It was so obvious in the research that parents really needed, something that create peace of mind, that we create a plan that has, a smart family included. And a smart family do the same, but for out of home, when the kids are connected with their smartphone using, the wireless network. And it's usually the same things, right? You want to control the content, what content they're accessing, the time. You want also to know the location of your kids when they're out of home. And you also want to know, or at least for 8 years old to 12, to know or limit who can call them and who they can call to. So it's optional, you can set it up, but you don't want anybody just calling your kids, right? So you can filter that too. So there are different filters, but those are the most common that we have seen.
And I think in addition to what Arturo was speaking about, I think there's two other questions you should look at when you're determining what kind of product that you're going to purchase. One is password protection. Is there a password control on the device, or do you have that ability to control that on your side? And also make sure you update your passwords regularly. Additionally, is there automatic software updates built into the products? Some of these can often fix new issues or potential bugs in the system. So that's also going to protect with privacy and security of all your devices.
I'm curious, going back to what Monica mentioned earlier about this gap in who can afford to be connected to this stuff, and sort of how that's become even more exacerbated during the pandemic. Have CTA's members, or has Verizon kind of seen an uptick in public places, schools, libraries, kind of trying to increase their connectivity and make these things more available for families who don't have access in the actual home?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think that the most important effort any home internet provider can and should qualify for the emergency broadband law that got into place right when the pandemic started, and is in place now, where low-income families can opt into up to $50 discount. That means that home internet is free, basically, for low-income families now. So as long as you qualify for low income, and there are different criteria, but it's a lot of the U.S. population, they qualify. So I encourage that, because home internet definitely is key for the kids to have access. Yes, we have seen a lot of take rate on the emergency broadband for FiOS, which we are very pleased that that's happening, because that will help them to connect the low-income families that cannot afford broadband connectivity.
Yeah, and in terms of access to a lot of these products, the schools have certainly been doing, laptop rentals, tablet rentals through the school system, but also libraries. You got to give them a shout out. For years they've always had, internet access for everyone. So you can go in and use their computers. I know I used to do that back in the day when my connection at home was not as great. It was dial-up, so it was fun to deal with. But going to the public library, a lot of those libraries not only have internet connection and computers you can use, but some of them also have kind of check it out programs where you can test out some of these devices on your own.
Oh no, Monica, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit more in terms of how people think about policy issues related to broadband. And so pre-pandemic in 2019, we asked some questions about what people thought that the government should be responsible for ensuring for all Americans. And back then, only about a quarter of Americans said that the government had a responsibility to ensure that people had access to high-speed internet. When we asked this question in 2021, that number had jumped to 43%. So about 15 percentage points. And compared to the other items that we asked about, including kind of K through 12 education, health insurance, fewer Americans say that the government has a responsibility to ensure high-speed internet, but that was the only item in which you saw a big jump. So what we're really seeing is that Americans overall are moving towards this idea that the government has some kind of role to play when it comes to broadband adoption.
I wanted to also ask you, Monica, I think the big question for a lot of parents is how young is too young? Like, when should I start, getting my kid a smartphone? I know you can't tell people how to parent, but in your research, have you found kind of a general baseline for when most parents start hooking their kids up with these things?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things that we did in our survey last year was kind of get a baseline of when people thought it was acceptable for children to have their own smartphone or to have their own tablet. And the vast majority of parents that we surveyed said that they did not think that children under 12 should have their own smartphone. Only about 20% said that they thought it was okay for a 12-year-old to have their own device. But when we asked the same question when it came to tablet use, you saw a little bit more acceptability on that front. So parents were more open to their children having a tablet at a young age. I will say there are, of course, like differences when it comes to, under 12 is a big range. And we see for both of those, there's definite concern for those under the age of 5 having their own devices. So one of the things that we wanted to do with the survey is understanding how children engage with these devices overall, but also understanding what people thought was the appropriate time for them to have their own device.
And Marisa, maybe that's why we're seeing a proliferation of the smartwatches for kids, because you want them to be connected, but they are under 12. So you're like, okay, I don't want the content. Let's give them at least a way that they can connect with me, call me, I can call them. You can do that with a smartwatch, for kids. And also, Leslie, by the way, most of them are coming with activity tracker too, steps, etc. Because to your point, they're at home all day long. And you want them to be also active. So most smartwatches are coming with that. So that's another insight of Monica. You're right. The 12 years, it has been kind of the threshold. We have seen it coming a little bit down, like acceleration on that. But also for 8, 9 years old is the smartwatch that is picking up, so they can be connected when they go to school, etc. But not to the point of a smartphone.
Leslie, maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of these products, like what Arturo is describing. I mean, what are the smartwatches for kids, or like the fitness tracker, or like health monitoring devices for kids? I know you mentioned some of those a little bit ago. Oh, there you go.
Yep. So, health and fitness has obviously been on top of mind through the pandemic for everyone. And consumers are really seeking out these kind of new tech products to help them monitor their vital signs and improve their well-being. And they're coming in all different form factors, whether it's, a smartwatch or a fitness tracker that's not a smartwatch, so it doesn't have that additional connectivity, which some parents are, concerned about in that realm. But, this sector has really served to as a kind of a prime example of how connectivity and technology can add significant value to products that traditionally, didn't incorporate it. So connected health monitoring devices such as blood pressure and blood glucose meters allow people to better observe their health metrics through mobile apps that track their progress over time, and really can also provide the benefit of sharing some of this data directly with health providers, especially as we've seen more and more virtual and telehealth visits over the past year. So, it impacts a lot of different areas, not just, making sure your child is out there being active, but at the same time, if you're not able to go to the doctor and share some of these data points face to face, you can share this real-time data with your physician.
Wow. A fundamental question that maybe I should have asked earlier, obviously you need like a strong network to have all of this connectivity, happening in your home at once. I mean, I know luckily my husband's at an actual office today, so he's not sharing my internet connection, but I can only imagine if you've got a family with several kids and both parents working and everyone's on the internet at the same time, that can be a strain. So, I guess speaking very practically, Arturo, how do you make sure that your home is like outfitted correctly so you can handle all of this stuff at once?
There are several factors, to consider a good connectivity at home, but I would mention 3. One, of course, is the speed. We always talk about having a good connectivity with a lot of bandwidth, because it is amazing the amount of devices that are connected. I went today through my Fios app, and I saw there are 30 plus devices connected, because you forget about them. But the Nest, right? All the laptops around, all the speakers, all are connected, smart TV. So it's amazing. So you need definitely speed. And I will tell you something that not many people know. In this virtual world, you want download, you want upload speed. The upload speed is usually in the disclaimer. You don't see it. But if you have a bad upload speed, the kids cannot be in the school well. Like you will see me kind of like a robot, right? So you need that upload speed. That's key. And the third factor that's growing big is the Wi-Fi coverage. Look, some of us are working in the basement. My wife is in the first floor, in the other corner, and the Wi-Fi coverage is super important. So check your app. They should have, in the case of Fios, we have a Wi-Fi analyzer, can tell you. And now, most of our plans are also coming with an extender right away. You need it. Like some people need the extender. Also, people working even out of the home to get some fresh air. So that has become the norm, to be honest. Better Wi-Fi connectivity, speed, and upload speed. Those three factors.
Yeah, we have some data to back that up in terms of the number of, households that are starting to connect to mesh networks or these whole home Wi-Fi systems. Because Arturo was mentioning, a strong connection is the backbone. So, as we have more devices, we need more bandwidth, hence a mesh network or a whole Wi-Fi system comes into play. And many are now equipped with 5G connectivity, which I'm sure Arturo can speak to more on that. But in our annual ownership and market potential study at CTA, we found 31%, or almost a third of households in the US now own a mesh network that extends the wireless throughout the home, and 17% plan to purchase one in the next 12 months.
Wow. Monica, did you want to jump in?
Just as a shameless plug, that the center is going to be releasing a report in a couple of weeks that looks at a lot of these questions, particularly around what people have done in the pandemic to upgrade their internet, what kind of challenges they've had with connections, and overall kind of any worries related to being able to pay for these services. So that should be coming out in a couple of weeks, which will kind of answer a lot of these questions. And we'll have some trend data as well to look at pre and post pandemic.
So I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but can you give us any insight into generally what the findings concluded?
Well, none that our comms people would let me, but I will say, it was really important for us to kind of ask this question of how technology, not only we've been talking about how technology intersects with all things in life, but as we're talking about, what about the actual logistics of, does it work? Is it working for my family? Is it working as people that are now working from home? So the report the survey asks a lot of those different questions. So should be really interesting, and looking forward to getting that out to the public.
Yeah, that sounds very relevant, especially since none of this stuff seems to be going away anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
I also actually wanted to ask another question about your other study, the one that is public. You mentioned that you really evaluated how kids are engaging with these different devices, and that there seems to be more of a comfort level with a tablet versus a phone. And I wonder kind of if you could walk us through some of those findings. I mean, is that because, kids are using the tablet for educational purposes, where they're using the phone for socializing when they're not supposed to be, or kind of if you kind of were able to decode the mystery of why parents are okay with one over the other?
Ask a follow-up as to kind of why, the level of concern is more so with kind of smartphone devices than tablets. But what we also have seen more broadly, so beyond hardware, and something we haven't talked about, is kind of the proliferation of what a lot of children are doing on their tablets, which is watching YouTube. YouTube has become a really big player in children's content. And what we see is that for parents of young children, 80% of them say their child ever watches videos on YouTube, and about half of that group say that their child watches videos on a daily basis. And that is something that's a little bit more common among kind of that older age group, the under 12, but even a majority of those under the age of 5 are watching YouTube, and many are doing so on a daily basis. So while I can't speak as to kind of what are the motivations of why there is a discrepancy in comfort level with tablet ownership, we do see a connection in terms of what kinds of things that parents are, what kind of content that parents are letting their children consume on tablets.
Yeah, the size factor, right? If you're watching video, you want a larger screen. So that, and since you're talking about 12 years old or lower, then they are mainly at home, Wi-Fi. So you may be better off with a tablet for your kids.
Yeah, and Arturo, we've talked about so many different options for how you can be connected, and so many different types of devices. When you're looking at the whole landscape of smart home innovation, and thinking about parents who are trying to navigate all this stuff, do you have particular recommendations that you would make about where to start, where to invest when it comes to smart home tech that can help the whole family?
Yeah, so like again, devices and applications, right? But in terms of devices, I at least personally, I found the smartwatches a great solution for kids, because again, they don't give the smartphone factor to a kid that is 8 years old, but you have that peace of mind that they are connected with you. They can call you anytime when they are in their activities out of the school. So in terms of devices, that's a very logical path. You have the smartwatch, and then you go into a smartphone probably around 12 or forward. Then in terms of applications, I would say that absolutely you have to look at some applications that help to, in particular, know the content and filter the content for your kids. You really want to be careful on that. And again, the Smart Family is the one that we offer, but there are several in the market. And again, as a parent, you should drive to have it, to at least filter that type of content that you don't want your kids to access in home and out of home. And then the other piece of functionality that they gave you, as I explained before, is the ability to make sure that the kids are calling and receiving calls from the people that so those pieces of technologies in terms of devices, and then software apps. I think that the apps are key also to make sure that your kids are accessing during the time and the content that you want.
And I think, adding on to that, when, we're specifically asking parents and non-parents alike, how they're evaluating these investments, we really should ask, how could smart home products support the efficiency and needs of you and your household? So one of the major pros of smart home products today includes the ability to simplify multiple tasks into a single automation, like setting up a morning routine, sometimes, by using a simple voice command. For example, turning on the lights, playing your favorite morning podcast or news network, even adjusting the AC, which, we definitely need during these 100-degree days here in DC. But I was speaking to a colleague the other day, and he actually has a routine set up for homework time. So basically, he tells the connected device to turn off TVs to reduce distraction, brighten the lights, set a timer for, X amount of time for homework, and even have the speakers play classical or background music to kind of stimulate the child's brain.
Wow. Here's $1 million question for you. What is the future of all this stuff? I mean, we've seen it evolve so quickly, already. And, based on the research that you've done, Leslie, into, consumer trends, and kind of just the explosion of technological innovation that's been going on just during the pandemic alone, do you have any predictions about, how smart home technology, and particularly, kids in smart home technology, like what that evolution might look like 5 or 10 years down the road, or even just a year from now, because things are changing so fast? Oh. looks like Leslie is frozen. The irony of talking about smart homes and having a technical glitch.
She needs bios. Just kidding. So I will say, Marisa, well, Leslie, come back. One piece that we are seeing trending up, and and you see all the developers working on it, is augmented reality. So I think that piece of the technology will keep going on. The ability to just with your device, not only to look at let's say a street and retail level and be able to get additional information on it, is something that we are seeing picking up, and augmented reality devices will be also growing fast in the future.
So for the lay people out there, and for me, augmented reality, are you talking about like virtual reality?
Meaning, no, it's still real in the sense, the best example that I have, is complementing your digital, environment, is be able to access information that you access, daily, but now with, better capabilities. And again, the example of, you are, instead of looking at your Google application in a 2D, you could be looking at, with your camera, looking at an environment, and it will show you. Or you can be in a supermarket, and look at all the products and right away see the price points. So it's more about video camera and be able to see more information in real time. So that's, that type of applications will be proliferating in the future, and you will need better connectivity. And that's why you are seeing 5G UW, ultra wideband, and more out of the home, better capabilities on the network side. And that's why we are investing heavily on C-band. You probably have heard that, to really get the network to a different level that can support all these new applications and devices in the future.
Got it. And I think we've got Leslie back. Are you with us, Leslie? I wanted to just give you a chance to also answer this question, since it was directed at you. Again, it was kind of just based on all the research you've done in consumer trends. What are your predictions for how the smart home technology, particularly with regard to kids, what that landscape will look like in the future?
Yeah, well, obviously, we know that it's going to continuously grow, and we conducted a smart home study this summer and found that 227 million, or about 89% of U.S. renters and homeowners, currently use and have installed at least one product within their households across about 22 smarter connected tech products that we researched. And among 70% report installing at least one of those products during or since the start of the pandemic. And adoption rates are increasing, especially as consumers start to understand the benefits of some of these technologies, like we discussed today, things like education, things like health and fitness. In our ownership and market potential study, we found 85% of households with children say they participated in remote or virtual activities over the past year, such as virtual learning or homeschooling since the start of the pandemic. So, overall, as needs arise, smart home products will likely evolve to adapt to these consumer demands in some of these areas that, weren't as prevalent years ago, such as education, health, wellness, and, really overall convenience.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the audience Q&A now, since I see we've only got a few minutes left. Here's a good one. What's one smart home tech every new parent should own? What about teen parents? Anybody have any suggestions for this parent? Leslie, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think, going back to what we were talking about earlier with strong connection and strong devices, you really need, a strong network within your home. So something like a mesh network. You walk into Costco nowadays, you see about 5 on display. So they're definitely on the market. You're able to get them pretty conveniently, but yeah, you just need that backbone connection. And unfortunately, I got hit with a poor connection moments ago. So it happens to all of us.
To me, it's the smartwatch that we were talking about. Definitely is great to have the kids connected without the risk of content stuff when you're talking about lower than 12. And the ability to track their steps and activities also good nowadays, because I feel that, again, experience of with 2 kids, they are now more in home than ever. And that's, you want them to be more active, and that helps a little bit.
Before I move on to another audience question, Leslie, can you briefly explain what a mesh network is? Because I bet I would like to think I'm not the only one who's not totally familiar with that with that term.
Sure. So it's a type of Wi-Fi router that we all have in our home, but it really extends your Wi-Fi to multiple rooms. So Arturo was mentioning it earlier, especially as we work from home, we're working all over our homes. We're able to bring our laptop to the kitchen. We're able to take it outside on nice days. So those whole home extender Wi-Fi systems will really help with bandwidth issues as you add to the number of devices that router or that Wi-Fi system has to back up.
Yeah, it's so important that, as I mentioned, some internet pricing plans are coming already with the extender and the router. It's basically that the new extenders now make sure that is compatible with your router. So usually it's better to get an extender from your internet home provider. So it kind of mesh nicely with the router and extender. Usually the router in the middle of the home, first floor right there. And then you have an extender in those areas that you may be working from the basement, put it in the basement. You may be working from the corner of the house, put it in that corner. So it will make the Wi-Fi connectivity much better. The Wi-Fi connectivity, if it gets too far away, the speed suffer. So the mesh network via router and extender will give you that capability. I mean, honestly, I couldn't live without my extender. Now it's much better.
I think we have time for one more quick question from the audience. This is a question about parental controls, third-party parental controls, especially on phones. Are there particular options that you would recommend? I know Verizon, Arturo, you mentioned that Verizon has one, but are there any other products that are particularly well equipped to help parents with this? Maybe this is something Leslie knows about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of products on the market now. Privacy and security are on top of mind for consumers, but as manufacturers as well. We've heard a lot about it in the news and so forth. I can't personally speak to the policy aspect of it, but the devices themselves, a lot of them have an option to set up parental controls when you initially get the product. So your child will not have that option to set their own password. It has to go through the parents. Or they have to know that password from the parents. So, just looking at that, when you're initially setting up a device is key. And most products on the market right now come equipped with that ability.
Yeah, but remember, right, what happened to me? My kid was using the YouTube TV in one of the TVs that I didn't set up, any filters. So just, you can also go to your router per se and establish a baseline of, filtering content across any device. And then, to your point, Leslie, you get the device of your kid and also set up their specific or more aggressive filters. And then you have these other smart family apps that is software related that also control. So there are different layers that you can use. Definitely all recommended. But we know there are several parents without any. No good idea. We should all worry about it. There's much content out there that you don't want.
Yeah, and another monitoring tool too. A lot of smart home systems come with energy monitoring. abilities. So things like smart plugs, you can see how much energy that smart plug is being used. Hence, you might be able to notice, what devices are, using that smart plug, or, how much smartphone or smart home is being used in that sense. So that's kind of like a back end sneaky way to see if your kids are kind of working around the password aspect of the tools, is to monitor that energy use that a lot of products have today.
Wow. Yeah. Like you, Leslie, I remember the days when I had a dial-up internet connection and I was like sneaking onto AOL Instant Messenger when my parents weren't around. Well, thank you guys so much for taking part in this conversation today. It's been so much fun and I think really informative. And thank you again to our audience members for tuning in. If you missed any part of this conversation, or if you have a friend or colleague you want to share it with, there will be a full recap and also a full video of the event on Washingtonian.com by the end of the day. And also be sure to follow all of Washingtonian's social media channels. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, so you can stay up to date on future events, and hopefully some of our audience members will tune in again. So thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.